Welcome to yet another ICMD webinar. Today's topic is freedom from addiction. It's my great privilege to introduce Dr. Steve Smith, our speaker for today. He's a general practitioner specializing in substance misuse and is the founder of KEYS Project. KEYS Project's mission is to equip churches and Christian organizations to reach their communities and support those who are facing addiction and to find freedom. Steve provides a medical oversight and GP license for client detoxes and a high-level support. He also works for CGL, Change, Grow, Life, alongside KEYS, as well as serving in a number of other ministries, pursuing his vision of seeing people find inner healing and freedom from pain and addictions. He's going to talk to us about a Christian response to addiction. The format we'll follow is, after this introduction, Steve will speak to us for about 30 minutes, following which we'll have a time of question and answer. So welcome once again, and over to you, Steve, for sharing your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be with you. Thank you so much for your introduction. And I'm really quite excited to be thinking that I'm addressing brothers and sisters right around the world. So I am going to talk to you about addiction, and in particular with a biblical perspective. Okay, so as Santosh has already explained, I am a Christian GP and I run a Christian drug and alcohol support ministry called the KEYS Project. And I'm going to talk to you about addiction with a Christian response. So I'm going to say 5 things. But firstly, I'm going to talk very briefly about what substance use and misuse actually is. When I talk about the word substance, we're talking about psychoactive substances, substances which affect the way we think and we feel. From that, we'll go on to talk about the extent of the addiction problem. I'll specifically talk about the UK. Obviously, it'll vary from country to country, but it is a massive problem wherever you live. We'll talk very briefly about what addiction actually is, and why people become addicted, either to substances or to behaviors. And finally, we'll look at what the way out is. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the way we work using the KEYS Project to help people find freedom from addiction, lasting freedom from addiction. I'm going to say that there are 2 important messages. If you don't get anything else, just get these 2 messages. The first message is that addiction primarily is a response to pain. It's not simply something that happens when people foolishly take a certain substance. Primarily, it's a response to pain. And the second is that the solution to that pain is a relationship with truth. And that's something that we as Christians can understand perhaps more than those that don't share our faith. Addiction is a response to pain. The solution is a relationship with truth. And if you don't remember anything else, remember those 2 things. So let's talk very briefly about substance use and misuse. And I'm talking about psychoactive substances. It's certainly not new. For those of us who love the Word of God, we can read about substance misuse, alcohol misuse by Noah. He was probably quite the drinker. We can read about his alcohol misuse in Genesis 9 and Genesis 19. On the other hand, we can read in the Bible, Psalm 104, that God has given given wine to gladden the hearts of men. So alcohol and drug use has been going on for a very long time. We've got lots of ancient extra-biblical examples, historical examples of the use of cannabis and alcohol. And the other thing to say that psychoactive substance use is commonplace, and I believe that many of us on this call will have used one form of psychoactive substance or another, perhaps even today. Many of us will have used caffeine, perhaps nicotine, sugar, chocolate, alcohol. So that then leads us to the question, when does substance use become misuse? So my speciality is I treat people with substance misuse problems. When is substance use a misuse? And a very simple definition has been given to us by the WHO, and it's when the use of a substance is not consistent with legal or medical guidelines. Now, one might argue that cannabis is no worse than using alcohol. But in the UK, at least, the use of cannabis is illegal. Therefore, using cannabis is substance misuse in the UK, at least, whereas alcohol use in moderation would not be considered substance misuse. And when it has a negative impact on our health or our functioning, so sugar can be substance misuse if it's affecting our health, causing diabetes, obesity, cancer risks. And when there is dependence. Now, just to say a few words about the extent of the addiction problem, in short, it is massive. In the UK, and I'm just going to talk about the UK, there are 4 million people who are using illicit substances. So these are substances that they legally should not be using, mostly cannabis. But that's actually a very significant proportion of the UK population, especially if you consider that we can take out young children and old people, a population of 60 million. 4 million is a big proportion of the adult population. But when it comes to using non-illicit substances, we've got perhaps 25% of our population using alcohol in a hazardous way, in a way that's not consistent with with health guidelines, drinking more than 3 units a day, for example, and drinking every day. And perhaps 10%, certainly of males, are dependent drinkers. I mean, that means they have physical responses, physical symptoms if they have a day without drinking. There are perhaps something like quarter of a million people in treatment for opiate misuse, which is what I spend much of my clinic time doing. Alcohol intake is massively increasing in the UK, doubled in the last 60 years. And there are literally millions of hospital admissions per year due to alcohol, and very many alcohol-related deaths, doubling since 1991. And these are old figures. So that's the extent of the substance misuse problem in the UK, but we're talking about addiction. So let's think about non-substance addictions and what we might call behavioral addictions. That also is a massive problem. So we've got various things. We've got people using, pornography is a massive issue worldwide. Many people are using it in a way that is adversely affecting their mental health and their life. And with that, sex, gambling, food is massive, as most of us can imagine. Gaming, internet use, relationships. People get addicted to control in their in addictions, controlling other people. And actually, what I haven't put here, maybe it's one area that I've had to watch, is just addiction to being busy, to working. So just to say, whether we're talking about substance or non-substance addiction, it's a massive problem for us as doctors and medics, and also for us generally as believers who want to help our fellow man. So what is an addiction? Well, we could spend a while looking at the diagnosis of addiction using psychiatry guidelines, but here's a nice, simple definition of addiction that I think is very helpful. Is characterized by compulsive engagement in rewarding stimuli. Notice I've emphasized, I've underlined, put in bold, rewarding stimuli. People take a substance or engage in a behavior that gives them pleasure, despite adverse consequences. And I remember working in a department where I would see people smoking, sitting in their wheelchairs with their amputated legs. They've had legs amputated due to peripheral vascular disease, but they continue to smoke, probably suffering with chronic bronchitis, with serious pulmonary issues. People continue to smoke, as we all know, continue to take alcohol, even though they've got liver failure. Okay, okay, so let's talk about why people become addicted, various reasons. So curiosity, and many of us probably have been curious about taking drinks, maybe other substances, experimentation with the adult world, recreational use of drugs, including with sex, is very common. Peer pressure, of course, is enormous. People find that substances help them cope with the day. Either it gives them confidence or increased performance, or helps them manage their stress. But here's the big one. It's escape from pain, mental and physical pain, and hopelessness. This is the big point that I'm trying to make. So I'm going to show a very short video that's been made by a man called Gabor Mate. If you're interested in this whole subject of substance misuse, you may already know of Gabor Mate. He's very prolific on the subject. And I'm just going to just show you what he has to say about addiction. He's got a very strong English, he's got a very strong Hungarian accent. So thankfully, there are plenty of subtitles on this video. It's very short.
All the substances of abuse, whether they're opiates or cocaine or anything else, they're actually painkillers. Some of them specifically are painkillers. But physical pain and emotional pain, the suffering is experienced in the same part of the brain. So when people suffer emotional rejection, the same part of the brain will light up as if you stuck them with a knife. The Eckhart Tolle says very nicely that addictions begin with pain and end with pain. So that all the addictions are attempts to soothe the pain. So when I work with addictions, the first question is always not why the addiction, but why the pain. And what you find is emotional loss or trauma. In the case of the severe addicts, as in the Downtown East Side here, they were every single one of them traumatized. There's no women walking the streets here who have not been sexually abused, not even by accident. But you know, whether it's a sex addiction or internet or relationship or shopping or work addiction, these are all attempts to get away from distress. Keith Richards, the Rolling Stone guitarist, said, who used to have a severe heroin habit, as you know, he said that all the contortions we go through just not to be ourselves for a few hours. Or why would somebody not want to be themselves? Because they're in too much distress and too much pain. So I don't care what they tell you about genetics or any of that choices or any of that nonsense. It's always about pain.
Hopefully that has made my point that almost always at the root of an addiction that people cannot break free from is something that people are escaping from. And if we can help them deal with the roots, then that is massive. And I've got a couple of quotes here from a couple of well-known celebrities. So I don't know how many of you will know in your parts of the world, Russell Brand. He's very well known, I know, in the UK and also in the States and other parts of the world. But he's a well-publicized recovering heroin addict. And he says the priority of any addict is to anesthetize the pain of living, to ease the passage of day with some purchased relief. Another well-known celebrity in the UK, at least, is Nigella Lawson, a famous cook. She received a lot of publicity when her cocaine addiction was exposed. And again, she says the problem wasn't drugs, the problem was life, coping with life. So just to say again that why do people get addicted? Well, it's actually what happens when they get involved in their addiction is there is some sort of reward. This can be demonstrated very clearly when people take a substance or engage in a certain behavior. The limbic system lights up. The people's dopamine levels and serotonin levels are increased. Basically, the drug and alcohol use, the substance use, the behavioral use is an antidepressant or it's an anesthetic. Very important point. So let's talk about the way out. Now, we could talk about the way out of addiction for a very long time. And I'm going to just say that there are 3 areas that we focus on in the Keys project, and we could have a day's seminar on each of those. But basically, I feel like if you're going to help somebody out of addiction, you do have to have a holistic approach. You have to look at the whole person. And that in itself is a massive subject. But community support is really crucial. And we encourage people that we're supporting to get engaged with a recovery community. So many people who are stuck in addiction have a very dysfunctional community. And so we need to help them find a new community, which is something that the church can offer. And here's a really important statistic from 12-step AA research, that if somebody is caught in addiction, if that person is to get somebody into their social network who is abstinent just having that person in their social network who is abstinent improves their chances of long-term recovery by 30%. That's massive, actually. So having somebody come alongside them, that in itself is really helpful in helping people to achieve recovery. So just think of the potential to support people that the church offers. So community support is something that's really crucial to what we try and do in the Keys project. I think it's very lacking in the medical services that I see. We not enough effort is put into helping people join communities of other people who are seeking recovery. So the 12-step network, the AA, NA, OA, Overeaters Anonymous, GA, Gamblers Anonymous, encourage people that you're trying to help to connect with other people who are also seeking recovery. So we could talk about that for a long time. We could talk about medical support, but that's not really what I want to talk about. So one thing I would say is that the medical aspect of recovery support is actually very simple. I think it's a shame that so many people think it's so complicated and just don't really offer the support and help that they could do, because it's not really rocket science, to use that expression. And I think far more educated people, not necessarily that medical, could be offering really helpful support, good advice, good guidance to help people manage and reduce their unhealthy substance use. But what I will talk about, because this is a meeting of Christians, is I will talk about the spiritual support that we offer here. So this is just to say again, the spiritual support isn't the be all and end all. It's very important. It needs to be done in conjunction with other aspects of support, community and medical support, and also looking at other things that are affecting the life of the person we're trying to help. So maybe, they're in debt, they've got sickness, they've got relationship issues. There's all sorts of things that we need to be looking at. But let's look at spiritual support. And I've said, I'm going to say again, that the relationship with truth is really important. We can be changed from truth. We can be changed by truth. And it's important to recognize that emotional pain results from beliefs. So we often think that somebody who's been traumatized, they've been abused, they've suffered loss, they've been bullied. We think sometimes that it's the actual act, the actual violence, whatever it may be, that has traumatized them. Well, maybe to a degree, but what has really traumatized people is the beliefs that they have taken on board as a result of that trauma. That I'm useless, nobody loves me, everything I do fails, whatever it may be. And a lot also alongside that, the desire for revenge may be, but it's emotional pain that is largely comes from unhealthy beliefs that people take on when they're traumatized. But unhealthy beliefs and mindsets can be changed. And the other thing that I think is important for us as Christians is that we need to recognize the spiritual battle. This is really quite crucial if we're really going to help people find real freedom. And bear in mind, all this stuff applies to most of us, all of us listening and involved, and it certainly has applied to me. We've all got on our journeys, on our spiritual journeys, to recognize that we so easily believe things that are not true about God and about ourselves that need to be changed. So we can be changed by truth. And you will know these verses. John 8:32, Jesus says, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. When you know the truth, when you really engage with the truth that you are loved, that you are forgiven, that you are accepted, that actually can be life-changing. And that's something that we all need to focus on for ourselves, that we can be really set free by knowing truth. And truth, of course, is a person. It's the person of Jesus. Jesus said that he is the truth. And we can be transformed. We can be radically changed. That word for transformed is the same word that is used of Jesus when he was transfigured. We can be totally changed by the renewing of our mind. And here are just a few sort of biblical references. And I believe these handouts will be made available to you so you can look up these verses. But 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17, I am a new creation. God has made us righteous. Verse 21, God made him to be sin him who knew no sin to be sin, that we might become the righteousness of God. So if we can actually believe that we've been made righteous, that we are new creations, that's radically life-changing. Believing that we are forgiven, that as we read in, there is no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. And also that we are loved, and that we're children of God. This is such a wonderful verse that you will obviously know. 1 John 3 verse 1, see what love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. And I believe that if any of us, whether or not we have an addiction, can truly engage with this truth will set us free. And that's the goal of the Keys Project, as much as anything else, is to help people really know that they are loved by God. And just I'm getting towards the end here, just a few keys to knowing the truth. Just remember that sometimes we've had decades of believing lies, of believing rubbish about ourselves and about God, that God's angry with me, God's always, he's waving a stick over me, whatever it may be. So we need to rehearse the truth. We need to set our eyes, look up these verses, set our eyes on things above. Whatever is lovely, whatever is noble, whatever is worthy, think upon these things. Take captive our negative thoughts and make them obedient to God. Now, here is a massive key to freedom from addiction. It's actually a massive key to freedom in life in general, and that's forgiveness. So it's a kingdom principle. If there's one thing that I could do for somebody who is stuck in addiction, it would be to help them to understand the importance of forgiveness, and to help people to forgive their abusers, to whatever it may be, to forgive those that have left them, to forgive themselves, sometimes even to forgive God. And as I've said, we absolutely need to understand the spiritual battle if we are really going to understand true freedom. And here are two verses that show us that the enemy, our spiritual enemy, latches on to negative thinking. So Ephesians 4 verse 27, in the context of anger, don't let the enemy have a foothold. And 1 Peter 5 verse 8, we read about the enemy prowling around like a lion, seeking those he might devour. And that's in the context of anxiety. So bear in mind that we need to be aware that we are in a battle. We need to take up our weapons and our shield of faith if we are going to really find the freedom that God has for us. So I think I think I've managed. Well, I think I've even managed to keep under 30 minutes. So I normally take a bit more time on this, but here we go. We've got through. So I hope you found that helpful. I would be more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Steve, for that excellent presentation and thoughts, especially highlighting the root as pain and then how we can respond to it. For those who came in late, this was Dr. Steve Smith sharing to us his thoughts on freedom from addiction, a Christian response to addiction. So let's have a time of question and answer. There are a few questions coming in, Steve. Thank you for, again, highlighting that whole issue of pain as the root cause. There is a question from Martin Back. If pain is the most important cause of addiction, then it is cruel to criminalize the use of substances. They rather need help, and the drug dealers need to be criminalized. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, I would agree with that 110%, 200%. Absolutely. Thank you very much for that comment. Yeah, because that actually, the criminalization of substance misuse is big part of the problem. I said in my bio that I work for CGL, and it's no longer CGL. I no longer work for CGL in the UK, but anyway, I did. And CGL used to be called CRI, which was Crime Reductions Initiative. So the major drug agency in the UK was linked to crime. So people who came to our clinics had this sort of banner over them that they were engaged in some form of criminality. So yeah, totally agree. And we could have a big seminar on that whole subject. Yeah, good point.
True, very true. Yeah. Sarah Kerr has a question from her experience. Having lived in the UK and having worked in US in one of the largest rescue mission recovery programs in Baltimore, I have been curious about the impact of prescription opioids, which flooded the US in mid-90s. Heroin is very common, and it is the prescription opioids that created a fast pathway to addiction and hitting rock bottom. How does this relate outside US?
Well,
for instance, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can speak for the UK, and it is a massive problem. And I sometimes shudder to think how many people I may have actually initiated opioids for. I think of people when I've been treating back pains, and I maybe have given them some tramadol or alongside other analgesics, and then people find, whoa, I feel better. I take the tramadol. Yes, my back pain is better, but actually life is better. And then they go back to their doctor saying, oh, can I have some more of that tramadol? The back pain still. And so many people have long-term prescribed drug addictions. And thankfully, you know, the same principles apply. You can help people wean themselves off the medication. And when it's a prescribed medication, that's somewhat easier than helping them with street drugs. But really, if you're going to help somebody to be free of opioids, prescribed or illicit, what we primarily need to do is find out what it is that they're finding relief from, the hopelessness, the pain, whatever it may be. But yeah, very massive problem. So addiction is, in all its forms, is massive globally. But I'm totally aware that it's a massive problem in the US, Sarah, and it certainly is in the UK, and I imagine it the same would be for many other countries too.
Yes, even in a country like India, tramadol is very commonly used. Alprazolam, one of the commonly used.
Benzos,
benzodiazepines is a major issue.
Yeah.
There's a question regarding sexual addiction. Once addicted, a sexual addict is driven by compulsion and lose self-control. How do you help a sexual addict detox from the habit? In some cases, 10+ years since teenage years, without first kicking the habit and while dealing with pain or whatever that started, the substance abuse will be possible to get him out. Yeah,
a really good question, because sex addiction, including pornography, is massive. I think one thing that really helps is if in churches we can be honest and open and vulnerable. One of the great things about the 12 Steps movement is that people join communities where they are vulnerable and they say, yes, this is, I've slipped, I've fallen, and this is my problem. And then that's half the battle. If you can actually admit, and step one of the 12 steps, so that's another big subject, 12 steps, is I am powerless over my addiction. I can't do it myself. I keep trying, and then I fall, whether it's food, whether it's sex, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whatever it is, and recognizing your powerlessness, and then getting not only the support of God, but the support of your brothers and sisters. So I don't know how many people are on this call, but there will be people for sure who have got addictions of one sort or another, whether it's sex, food, drugs, alcohol, benzos, whatever it may be, and get help. Link up with other people who are on that journey with you. Now, for in the UK, and I don't know whether this is an international, there is if you were to there are various organisations, various self-help groups. My son actually has been my son is somebody who has been very open about his addiction to pornography, and you can look him up, Joshua Luke Smith, and he did a TEDx talk about it, and he works through he has supported an organization called Naked Truth, and I think they help people with sex addiction and pornography addiction. So if you look up Naked Truth, that organizations like that will help you. And the same principles, get help. There are lots of programs, Freedom in Christ, that help you to really understand the truth that we've been talking about. It's not a quick fix. You can't just quickly read those verses and then suddenly, oh yes, I'm fixed now. So it's a long journey. One thing that I've been discussing with my wife recently that we need to teach more with our program is this expression: choose your pain. Choose the pain of your addiction and your hopelessness, or choose the pain of discipline Not discipline to pull your socks up. I don't mean that, because we can't. But the discipline to really work at getting free, because we've all got stuff. We've all got baggage. We've all got hurts that we carry around with us. We've all got lies that we've been believing, sometimes for many decades. And if we're going to be changed, if we're going to be transformed, it's not a case of one day reading this verse and saying, yes, I'm forgiven, God loves me, everything's okay. We sometimes have to work at it day after day after day, rehearsing the truth, accepting that I am the child of God. And actually, one thing that I think is really important is to really believe that you are a new creation, even if you have slipped, even if you have fallen today back into pornography with masturbation and everything else that goes with it, and whatever you think, oh my goodness, I've done it again. Just have in mind that you are a new creation. And I love the analogy that when we become, there's the story, this fairy, I'm sorry, I'm preaching a little bit, but there's the story of the prince who was once a frog, and the frog was kissed, and the frog became a prince. Well, that's us. We were once frogs. We've been kissed by the king, and we've become princes and princesses. And sometimes we behave like frogs. But if we actually believe, I know people that, honestly, that have found freedom from addiction by just choosing to believe that they are a prince or a princess, that they are a child of God. And that actually I don't have to behave like a frog anymore. I once was a frog. And sometimes I slip up and behave like a frog, but actually I'm a child of God. So that, I mean, this is such a big subject, but whatever the addiction is, I believe the principles are the same.
Thank you for that. I think that 4 principles, recognizing your brokenness, identifying yourself with the broken community, recognize that you are a prince, at the same time disciplining yourself to walk that long journey of recovery along with the community. Thank you for that. There is a question. I have an addiction to sex and I am a Christian. At the age of 58, I learned that this stems from an abuse as a child. As an introvert who simply cannot open up with others out of fear and guilt, how do I seek help?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So unfortunately, it's so tragic because there is so much sexual abuse, and sadly, it's perpetuated one generation after the other. And I think we have touched upon some of the answers. Is to be open and vulnerable, and to get help from people who can help you. Now, there is actually a lot of online support. I'm happy to, if anybody wants help in getting online support for specific addictions, feel free to email me through the email address I've given, detox@keysdetox.org. detox@keysdetox.org. And if you can't find specific help, then we might be able to give you signposts. But yes, you need help. You need the help of brothers and sisters, particularly those who've been on this journey. But believe that this can be mastered. I have seen so many people who have had such messed up pasts, and the reality is they can be free. Whoever's written that, you can be free.
Yeah, we will share the email address and other resources for all those who are registered in 24 hours time. So we will put in the chat box too. One of the questions is in the medical intervention part, how do you feel about the use of methadone? I just want to add on that in India, when I was part of a harm reduction program, and we started with buprenorphine before methadone came in. Methadone came much later. So interesting question.
Yeah. Well, I would say methadone has been, on one hand, abused. But on the other hand, I believe that many lives, I think I've prescribed many people methadone, and I believe it's been a lifesaver. So and I've quoted Russell Brand, and Russell Brand is very disparaging about methadone, but it's so much better to be taking a substance that's not going to harm you. It's much better to be doing that than to be injecting your neck with dirty needles when you don't know what dose of heroin you're taking. So if somebody is is using street heroin, they're injecting themselves, they don't know from one day to the next how many milligrams or even grams or whatever they're taking. Well, then how much better it is to be on what we call OST, opiate substitution therapy. Now, it's interesting. And in some places, in some countries, I know that buprenorphine is the only OST that is available. I know that's the case for Turkey. So, yeah, I think if the buprenorphine is safer in many respects, sometimes it's easier to come off. There are pros and cons. But for some people, certainly many of the people I see in the UK who are street drug users, they simply will not engage with buprenorphine because I don't want to go into too much detail, but buprenorphine has a blocking effect. So if somebody actually wants to continue using on top, it doesn't work well with buprenorphine. And there are a lot of people whose lives are saved by being on a certain dose of methadone. And for those who want to get free, it's hard work, but they can detox off it. But I do understand also the problem with methadone often is the prescribers who have this attitude that sometimes the prescribers have this attitude that my patient needs to stay on methadone, otherwise he or she will relapse. And so often the prescribing of methadone is badly managed by the prescribers. But if it's managed well, I think it's a wonderful drug.
Thank you. Yusuf Jung from Sudan is asking, there are many cases of medical personnel who becomes addicted to substances. How can you help such groups of colleagues? Yeah,
I'm aware, a doctor that I worked with, his son was an anesthetist. I say was, very sadly, because this young man started using fentanyl. And sadly, it became very easy for him to just take a little bit of the fentanyl away from a patient when he was doing anesthetics, and on one occasion he sadly died. So yeah, we're aware that drug misuse amongst the medical profession is very significant, as of course is alcohol misuse. So I believe one of the first step is what we mentioned earlier. The first, look up the 12 steps. 12 steps are very good principles. Just admit that you're powerless over your addiction and that you need help. Get that help from a community, get that help from God, and hopefully, you can start that journey. But obviously, it's very difficult for a medical professional to admit that he or she has got a problem, because then, of course, they can quickly lose their registration or whatever. But if it's done in a sensitive and careful way, I believe the help is out there.
Thank you. Fongden Liu is asking whether sex workers have a high risk of sex addiction.
Sex workers, yeah, well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can fully give the answer to that. I believe that some of them have. I know that many sex workers are not there by choice, and I can't say what the proportions are, but I've treated many sex workers, and I think many of them are taking drugs because they have, the drug use has led to prostitution, but sometimes their prostitution has led to drug use and vice versa. But for many of them, it's a lifestyle that they desperately want to break free from. So yes, some of them may have their own sex addiction, but for most, let's remember that for many sex workers, it's a nightmare that they've got trapped in.
Philip Wood is asking whether, can you comment on the cold turkey, that's a sudden stop of addictive behavior versus slow diminution of dose?
That's a very good question. That's a really important subject. How do people detox? There's different ways of detoxing. Now, some people in the UK will be, or I think in other countries, will be aware of the organization called Battelle. And I think it's fair to say that the Battelle philosophy is let people do cold turkey and really feel the pain of withdrawal as a deterrent to going back into the drug use. And I think I've spoken to people who have done that, and they thought, oh, that was awful. I'm not going back there again. I'm not doing that again. So there is an argument for cold turkey when it comes to heroin misuse. I think a lot of people, when they have to do it that way, they can't stand it, and then they slip away and they go back into drug use. On the other hand, let's remember that, of course, you're aware that prayer is massive. So cold turkey plus prayer. So what's her name? Jackie Pullinger has helped a lot of people without any substances, simply with prayer. But what is really important, cold turkey for heroin misuse is fine. If you're suffering from withdrawals from heroin misuse, all you get basically is what I would call gastroenteritis by proxy or whatever. You get stomach cramps, you get sweats, you get severe diarrhea, but eventually you get better. If you try and do cold turkey from benzodiazepines and from alcohol, you may not survive. So alcohol withdrawal, which is uncontrolled, can be fatal. And I think the autopsies. So I don't know whether the question refers simply to opiates or whether it's called drugs across the board, but a very large number of people, autopsies of brains of people with alcohol misuse who've had repeated withdrawals do show larger amounts of atrophy. So there's a lot of brain damage has been done by people, has been received by people suffering alcohol withdrawals, and of course people can have seizures and dementia and death, and the same would apply to a degree to benzo withdrawals. So with care.
Thank you. Interesting how we talked about Bethel. In Delhi, we have a Bethel center, multiple centers. They have cold turkey, prayer, and physical exercise. They put them into heavy work.
Absolutely.
So you use a combination of all three together, and this is interesting.
That's a really important point, actually. How many people are taking drugs because they're bored, and because they're taking drugs, they can't work. It's a terrible cycle of drug use, boredom, drug use, and work is so important. I do love Patel, and I love the way that they put people to work. And we could also have another conference on things that we can do to improve our mental health, and activity and work is really helpful for us all. But absolutely, it's a distraction, so people can distract themselves from the pains of withdrawal by exercise or work. Yeah, it's a very good program.
Somebody's asking this question. Substance use is a form of self-medication, as I see it. Chronic prescription of SSRIs by doctors is more acceptable, it seems, because it is safer and controlled. People with recurrent depression and benefit greatly from this, and it makes their life doable. Just a comment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I made the point that substance misuse or behavior, whether it's gambling, pornography, whatever it may be, that it's all raising our dopamine and serotonin levels in our limbic system, and which is exactly what SSRIs are doing, or other antidepressants. So yes, let's recognize that. Let's recognize that people are using their behaviors and their substances as antidepressants. And for some people, long-term antidepressants is perhaps the best way to cope with life. But I would also suggest that I don't want to be very. I mean, the use of antidepressants for people who've got faith is a big subject. I've happily prescribed antidepressants, but I also believe that many people who are on medication, whether it's prescribed or whether they are self-medicating, can find freedom. My wife was on antidepressants, and she talks very freely about that. And she had severe depression, and she has found freedom by the principles that we've talked. And she believes that she will never be depressed again. So if you want to hear more about her story, contact me. I'll put you in touch. So life is a battle, whether you like it or not. And so we've got to choose whether to succumb to the battle or whether to fight. And of course, the great news is that we can fight from victory. Of course, this is another theological discussion. But if we live from victory, then the pain becomes smaller and smaller.
Thank you for that. I think, and it's a lifelong battle. It is not just one time.
100%.
The question is, substance abusers get cleaned up first to regain self-control. For example, Alcohol Anonymous.
Yeah.
Is it not the same needed for sexual addictions like porn?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the approach to every addiction is from different directions. So it's, you know, not many people will control their addiction by simply gritting their teeth and pulling their socks up. Some people might, but most people have to admit that they are powerless over their addiction, whether it's sex, whether it's food, whether it's heroin or cocaine. Now, the thing is when it comes to things like food and sex, we're not saying that you've got to be totally abstinent. I mean, if overeaters became abstinent from food, they would die. So things have got to be controlled. And I mean, I certainly think for most substances, if people want to be free, they need to be abstinent, certainly in the short term. So I would say the same principle and same would apply for gambling. But when it comes to something like sex addiction, for somebody who's in a godly sexual relationship, who's married, is what I'm talking about, then yeah, they've got to somehow work it all out. But I don't think it's a case of getting the self-control. It's not a case of where the reductions, whether the substance misuse comes first or the self-control comes first. It's a combined approach, if that helps.
Yeah. How do I help a family member who won't acknowledge that they have a problem with alcohol dependence?
Well, such an important question. This I should have said more about this, because very often we have people who want help for their loved ones more than the loved ones want help for themselves. And this is a vital message. So please remember this. You can often do more harm than good by helping somebody who doesn't really want to be helped. And sometimes love has to be tough. So if he or she doesn't want recovery more than you want it for them, I suggest that sometimes we just have to leave them to it. And that can be a tough thing to do, because when we are bailing people out, so let's say, for example, somebody is, you know, you're helping them with their debts. It's a very tough one. I'm not saying it's an easy answer, but sometimes when we're bailing people out, we actually become what we call enablers. So sometimes you can enable somebody in their addiction by trying to help them if they're not ready. People need to be ready. And Alcoholics Anonymous talk about the gift of rock bottom. Sometimes people really need, sadly, to reach rock bottom. It's like the story of the prodigal son, isn't it? It's when the son reached rock bottom, and he was you know, remember the context is Jews, and for a Jew to be feeding pigs would have been rock bottom. And it was when he was rock bottom, he realized, I need to change. So trying to help somebody before they've reached that point of I want help for myself can sometimes be counterproductive, but it's tough. And there are help groups for family members. So there's Al-Anon. Al-Anon is an organization that helps families of people who are in addiction. And that would, if you are that person, then I strongly encourage you to seek help so that you can learn to how to best help your loved one who is in addiction.
Yeah, that's a common issue. I find in my clinical practice, the wives would bring the husbands, and the husband would be smiling away.
Absolutely.
Don't want to be treated. The wife would say, please take care of him. And then there's a question from Angel Wong on how do we be treated to itches? Most of us do not have a great pass, but more or less itches of different sizes. If itching is also a pain of different levels, what kind of good advice can you give us?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's not another subject is when physical pain overlaps with mental pain, and that's another big deal, another big subject in itself. So you know, many people in our drug addiction clinics are also on treatment for painkillers as a pain, but just to say that if you and I really encourage I encourage mindfulness, the practice of learning to just focus on the presence. Sometimes not to be at the mercy of your emotions, your feelings, and that includes physical pain, can be really helpful. So I'm assuming that's what we're asking about, pain. But yeah, I'm afraid that's a big challenging subject in itself.
Thank you, Steve, for that excellent presentation and responding to the questions. Thank you all for joining, and see you again in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.